Good morning, everybody. My name is Aimee David, and I am the Director of Ocean Conservation Policy at Monterey Bay Aquarium. Oh, actually, first the clicker for the slides. I think I neglected to bring that one out here.
The clicker is on.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No worries.
All right. And this is my institution, the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I'm also the current chair of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But first, it is my absolute pleasure to be here today to talk with my esteemed colleagues about how aquariums are increasing our engagement in conservation action. Unfortunately, today we don't have any zoos on the panel, so the title of this session is a little incorrect. But again, just thrilled to be here with my aquarium colleagues and telling these stories. And today I'm joined by, starting to my left, Charmaine Dahlenburg, who is the Director of Field Conservation at National Aquarium in Baltimore. Andrea Densham, Senior Director Policy and Advocacy at the John G. Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. John Forrest Dohlin, Vice President and Director, Wildlife Conservation Society's New York Aquarium. And Dr. Amber Whittle, Director of Conservation at the Florida Aquarium. Now, conservation is not new to our aquariums. Like many others across the US, especially when it comes to inspiring our visitors to care about the ocean, conducting conservation field research, and rescuing and rehabilitating species in our care. But over the last several years, a new model of aquarium as conservation leader has emerged. And as the urgency of the situation has increased, demonstrated most recently by the alarming UN report that showed worldwide biodiversity at an all-time low and up to 1 million species at risk of extinction. And of course, the ongoing threat of climate change and ocean acidification, as well as a host of other pressures. Our aquariums have redoubled our efforts to use our power as institutions and the power of our constituencies to defend the health of the ocean and freshwater animals and ecosystems in our care. And we know from market research, and we do a lot of it, that our audiences expect us to be conservation leaders in addition to beloved attractions. Younger generations in particular want to see institutions like ours serve as stewards of the places and animals that we have in our care. At Monterey Bay Aquarium, we inspire 2 million visitors a year to love the ocean. We've pioneered research on sea otters, sharks, and tuna. We have created market incentives for sustainable seafood. How many of you have our Seafood Watch app on your phone or a card in your wallet? Love it, thank you. And if you haven't already, it really is a terrific app. I highly recommend it. And your power as consumers is helping us work directly with businesses to transform the global seafood market. So how's that for an app? And then we also are increasingly mobilizing our visitors and online audiences to take action on ocean protection policies in California and at the federal level. So that is the reason why we are in DC for CHOW every year, is because we know that as aquariums, we have a role to play in bringing science-based information to our decision makers and urging them to promote policies that restore and protect our nation's invaluable resources. And that's also why in 2016, Monterey Bay Aquarium joined with National Aquarium and Shedd Aquarium, both represented on the stage with me, in forming the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, which now boasts 20 aquarium members from across the country, 17 states, and it includes everyone on the panel today, as well as a total of 9 aquariums who are active in CHOW this year, which I think is a record for our industry. And we created the partnership both to bolster capacity at individual aquariums that wanted to be more engaged in conservation action, especially around policy, as well as increase our collective conservation impact on issues that range from ecosystem protection to sustainable fisheries and aquaculture and plastic pollution. And a great example of our joint work together is the joint commitment our aquariums made to immediately eliminate plastic straws and takeaway bags from our food and retail operations. We've also made a collective commitment to reduce, and many of us eliminate, plastic beverage bottles and plastic foodware in our institutions. And we are doing that not just to walk the talk, but also to help influence the broader supply chain through working with our vendors to make similar changes with their other clients, as well as our regional businesses and governments. We've also collaborated on 2 consumer campaigns, as well as individually, each of us are leaders in many respects in advancing local and state pollution policies. So today our panelists are here to share even more novel and significant ways that our aquariums are asserting our conservation leadership, how we're connecting with our communities, how we are researching and implementing solutions to environmental challenges, and how we are bringing our institutional voices as well as the voices of our communities to these solutions, and other measures to protect our absolutely invaluable natural resources, whether they be ocean, coastal, and in many cases, inland and freshwater resource protection to bear, from the local to global level, including right here in DC. So with that, I'd love to turn it over first to Charmaine to talk to us about your conservation journey at National Aquarium.
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here to share a story. The National Aquarium is located 45 minutes north of here, and we rest in the center of the nation's largest estuary, the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay was the estuary that was first targeted by Congress for protection. And fast forward to today, in 2019, today we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Obama administration designating the Chesapeake Bay as a national treasure. So really calling on federal government to aid in and lead the efforts in the protection and the restoration of the entire watershed. So like many zoos and aquariums, the aquarium plays an active role in engaging our audiences in the policies that support the health of the bay waters and also the people and the wildlife that it supports. But as an aquarium, how do we do this? There are really 4 ways that the National Aquarium narrows in on connecting policy and turning it into community action. So make sure that forwards. There we go. First, we are actively participating in the restoration efforts of the Chesapeake Bay. We do this through community-based habitat restoration, through research, and through education. We also gather and collect the science to inform us. And we do this through collaborations with our trusted partners. And then we make the science available for everyone. The National Aquarium is really good at translating difficult concepts into digestible pieces of information for the general public. And then lastly, we provide the outlet and the opportunity for people to act. And whether that's through an awareness campaign or if they're signing up online to join us directly on the field, looking at these problems head on, what we hope that translates into is an informed voter. So the most recent regulatory changes, proposed changes of the Clean Water Act of 1972 really provides us a model example of how the National Aquarium will take a political stand when it directly relates to the work that we do. The National Aquarium has a 20-year investment in the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And we look at these proposed regulatory changes as jeopardizing all the successes that we've built on over the years. And it really is a detrimental step backwards for us. So earlier this year, the National Aquarium launched a public awareness campaign. And that was in-house advocacy. We taped a podcast that aired on WYPR. And we also had a website that people could go to receive the facts and how this would personally affect them, these changes, and the opportunity to take a pledge. And then as part of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, we were able to pull together 25 zoos and aquariums to jointly submit and sign a letter of public comment in support of the Clean Water Act. But as an aquarium, we are expected to, and we have a responsibility to show how we are doing our part, our investment in doing our part. And that's what I want to share with you, just an example of how we're doing this. I will say that the awareness campaign was a huge success. In the end, we collected 754 pledges, and the pledges spanned across 40 states across the United States, which was amazing. But we have to show people how we're invested, and we can't tell people what to do unless we are tackling head-on the challenges that we face in our own backyard that are related to clean water. So the example I want to give you is just outside of our doors of the National Aquarium. So this is a dead-end channel that sits between our two buildings, and it's very characteristic of Baltimore's Inner Harbor. In 2016, the aquarium made a commitment to create a model urban waterfront, which is re-envisioning this space as a green district. And what you need to understand about the Baltimore Inner Harbor, there you go. What you need to understand is that the harbor is one of the most polluted bodies of water in the state of Maryland. And the public perception is incredibly negative. If you were to come down to Baltimore and come to our aquarium and sit in one of our benches, you would be facing away from the water. Our benches face inward. So there's this history and legacy of negativity when we think about our own backyard. So the largest component in our project here are the floating wetlands. The National Aquarium has had floating wetlands in the harbor since 2010. And we have learned a lot. There has been a lot of lessons learned. And this is where we landed. So this is our floating wetland prototype. And this is version 4. This was custom designed to be able to live within the Baltimore Inner Harbor in an urban city. So it's extremely modified from any other version we've had before. And now what we're able to do is test how this floating wetland technology responds to polluted waters. These are just some of the photos that we had over the past year. It was launched in August in 2017. So with this, we open it up as a living laboratory. So we are working with universities to collect the science and all these scientific studies, but also we are seeing every single 5th grader in Baltimore City and hosting them in the harbor so that they learn what is living in the harbor. They will be voters one day. And that particular education program was funded through the NOAA BWET grant, so we're very grateful for that. So in closing, I just want to say that our next steps are to really perfect our floating wetland and then increase it to about 10,000 square feet. Right now we're at 400. And also open the door and start the conversation of having floating wetland technology accepted as a best management practice for tidal waters, because it is not yet. So there is a lot to come, so stay tuned. Thank you.
Great, excellent. And now moving towards the middle of the country, I welcome Andrea to provide remarks about what's going on in her neck of the woods.
Thank you. It's great to be here from CHOW Aquarium. As many of you know, and some of you may not, CHOW Aquarium's in Chicago, Illinois. And like many of my partners here, we're working together to try to be wise and smart and innovative together, not only between and across our aquariums, but with our local partners, as well as with our federal partners. Wanted to begin with what is normally a slide that you think of when you think of an aquarium, a child looking at an extraordinary bit of aquatic beauty. And in the Great Lakes, and at CHOW Aquarium in particular, for many kids and adults, and often when I'm here in DC, people share stories that this experience of them staring and seeing wonder in ways that they may have never seen before, and some may never see otherwise in person. Right? For some folks, the experience that they have in our building, inside our historic building, is one that is their only interaction with beluga whales, with sea otters, with an extraordinary assortment of things, including the amazing sturgeons from our own Great Lakes. So, like many of our partners, we try to spark compassion and inspire action. But we do it for a reason. We're mission-driven, and I think that's one of the things that the ACP partners have all in partner with each other. We're trying to take the educational work that we do, the work of our scientists, and the work we do in restoration for a goal, to ensure that we have healthy and vibrant ecosystems, both locally and nationally. I'm going to talk a little bit about our work at SHED and my policies team work. We're lucky to be not only have a historic building that is on the shores of Lake Michigan, but we're set in a Great Lakes community. And that Great Lakes community means we have the opportunity not only to do work locally at the state level, but also binationally as well as federally. So we split our policy work between Great Lakes and local waters work, as well as ocean work, because we have amazing scientists that go on a boat that's ported in Florida and goes down to the Bahamas with some of our colleagues here to do works on sharks and groupers and conch and the like. All of that together helps us move forward in terms of the work that we need to do. Sorry. Let's see if we can get to the next one. There we go. So we take the actions of our smart partners to try to educate and empower our partners. So we worked really closely with National and all of the ACP partners on the Clean Water Act. Centered in the center of the country, we have the opportunity to talk about clean water in a way that's rather unique. It's critically important. The water that's outside of our building that you can gaze and see is actually the water that we also drink. We're deeply connected to it. Our partners in the state of Michigan, and Representative Dingell was the one who wrote the Clean Water Act. I had the opportunity to talk with the current Representative Dingell about John Dingell's legacy and how important it is. We know that that legacy is important because we need to work to ensure that it continues to be enforced and it continues to be engaged. But the only way to do that is to ensure that our local communities understand how it impacts them. So our policy work is locally rooted advocacy. It's designed in a way that it ensures that the folks that come can see how it might impact them in Missouri or Kansas or in Humboldt Park in Chicago or the south side of Chicago, that we make that connection and that we make sure that we're being flexible, agile, and that we design our communications in ways that meet people where they are, provide them the science-based knowledge to then go back home and do amazing and important work. Our work, while the work we do here in DC is critically important, and I'm here very often, the work we do, this is our state capitol, is also incredibly important. We just finished our very long session and very important and historic in many ways spring session in the General Assembly in Illinois on Saturday at midnight. That session, we worked in partnership with many of our environmental colleagues from across the state. We sat down in December and talked about what we should be working on together. We prioritized issues. We all took ones that were important to us, and then we worked together to try to have an impact. We were really lucky, and in great part because of the lessons learned from many of our ACP partners, we were able to draft a microplastic study bill that was modeled after our colleagues in California, informed by our colleagues in Washington and New York, to make sure that we're doing something smart and innovative. It passed. We're now going to have a study. SHED's going to work with our colleagues at Northwestern University and University of Illinois to host a panel to discuss how we set this study up and develop, we hope, innovative Great Lakes knowledge around microplastics. We did the same thing around nutrient pollution. As you know, we're an agricultural part of the universe, and that can result in really bad outcomes. And our colleagues who are near Lake Erie know very well what those sort of nutrient pollutions can do with the algae blooms. That also is very similar, however, to what happens in Florida. So we're really aware of making that connection between what happens locally in the Great Lakes and the impacts that it can have other places, including our beautiful oceans. See if I'm having the technology adventure. The great thing about being located in the Great Lakes is the bipartisan tradition that we come from. We hope to continue to share the great success that we have in the Great Lakes with all of our colleagues regionally, and many of our colleagues work regionally. As many of you all know, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is a core tenet to the work that we do in the Great Lakes. I'm honored to be able to work with our colleagues at the Healing Our Waters Coalition that works binationally, as well as with the folks at NOAA and EPA to ensure that and the Department of Commerce to ensure that we're advancing clean water issues, that it's rooted in local economies. I was just at a Great Lakes Commission meeting that was receiving a report on the economic impact of us ensuring that we have healthy and vibrant Great Lakes. That work is true also for all of our ecosystems, whether it's on the Northeast, the Gulf Coast, or the West Coast. It's critically important. And we use research-driven, just like all of our colleagues, data to ensure that we're moving forward. And when I first came on board, not only did I learn from our colleagues that were sitting here, but I have the opportunity to have a CEO who's a scientist. So we ensured that science was our North Star as we moved forward. And I'm able to sit down with our scientists, half of whom do Great Lakes and local water research, the other half that do ocean work, to ensure that that's informing our policy. So whether it's invasive species and the Asian carp work that we are doing both nationally and locally, to nutrient pollution and microplastics, as I talked about earlier, our goal is to try to ensure that we're building resiliency in our Great Lakes and in our local communities. We also, like actually all of our colleagues here, and especially those of us who are kind of post-industrial communities, have backyards that look like this. So if you look out the front of Shed, you see an extraordinary, majestic Great Michigan Lake. That is what much of the rest of our waterways look like. That's part of the Chicago River and our canal system. It is that is our responsibility to clean up, to ensure that it is healthy and vibrant for years to come. We are rolling up our sleeves in Chicago, just like our colleagues on both sides. We're not only rolling up our sleeves to get out there and do restoration work and get muddy and mucky and make sure that it's happening right, but we're also sitting on municipal councils. One of my colleagues, Charmaine, has just been appointed to a city group doing work on the Great Rivers. I was lucky enough to sit with our incoming mayor, our now new mayor, to talk about how our environmental council is going to be set up. Those are the type of activities that I would encourage all of you to do, to sit in and to be there, to roll up your sleeves, to do the stuff that's not in front of the cameras, that's behind the scenes, and that often are legacy activities. And you know, the work that we do in these spaces is also about being innovative and smart with the infrastructure. So this area right here is soon to be part of a new development. These are very important areas for development. They are ones that folks want to put high rises. They want to put new engagement. Well, we need to be super smart about how we design policy and how we engage in those conversations with our development staff and partners at the city and in the regional. And we also need to ensure that when we're talking to our elected officials, that we're helping to advance things not only legislatively, passing good laws, but ensuring that there's resources once we pass acts, whether it's Magnuson-Stevens or GLRI, to make sure annually we're ensuring that those appropriations are designed to be rooted in conservation and in community and can ensure that we can advance the work for decades to come. And I'm going to now pass it off. I just flipped past my last one. It's okay. It's okay.
Oh, look, that was me.
That was me.
Thank you, Andrea. John, the floor is yours.
So thank you for having me here today, and it's great to be up here with my colleagues from the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. For those of you who don't know the New York Aquarium, we are part of the Wildlife Conservation Society, and the Wildlife Conservation Society goes back to the turn of the 20th century. It runs, it's a very interesting organization. We run 5 zoos and 1 aquarium in New York City. So the Wildlife Conservation Society is the Bronx Zoo and it's the New York Aquarium, and we run city zoos for the city of New York. So that's about 1,200 people headquartered in New York running these sort of inspirational centers. But in addition, then, we have about 1,600 people around the world working in the field on conservation issues and both international policy and regional policy issues to try to take care of what we see as our core mission, right? Saving wildlife and wild places. And that's a really interesting problem for the New York Aquarium here as we're redefining what is the aquarium of the 21st century. Because while my colleagues are busy working around the world in places like the Barrier Reef off of Belize, which is a World Heritage Site, diverse, beautiful, isolated places with incredible biodiversity. You know, I have an internal discussion with my colleagues about what are the lessons that we can take from doing conservation in places like this and bring it to places like this, a whole different field site. And so I'm within WCS and now the aquarium in discussion with the city of New York, really trying to think through the aquarium of the 21st century as a center for urban marine conservation, a distinct and important subset of our greater mission towards marine conservation around the world. And the question is, how is it different and how is it the same, and what role do aquariums play that perhaps no other institution can play in that? If you look at this, there's very few places that we work around the world where the number of people outnumber the populations of wildlife that we're trying to save. So 22 million people in the tri-state area around New York, 22 million people living right next to surprisingly intact wildlife, depleted but intact, that was in fact the basis for our actual existence there and continues to be so in many different ways. From the Lenape Indians forward, the incredible productivity and diversity and just bounty of the natural waters around New York was really the basis for our economic growth and success. And it's been so successful, in fact, that we've left it all behind. I think unlike my colleagues in some of these other places, New York has been a victim of its own success in leaving behind its maritime heritage. When you're in New York, you know, you're thinking about the ballet, you're thinking about Broadway, you're thinking about Wall Street, you're thinking about many things. You rarely think about the fact that we are a city of marine wildlife. But it's true, and it's a really amazing fact, right? When you're talking about wolves and bears and bulls, on the terrestrial side, you're speaking only in metaphor or you're evoking a distant, distant past. But if you talk about charismatic megafauna in the waters of New York, it's still there. And it's an amazing fact that 22 million people do still live around this fauna. And that's one of the great things that an aquarium of the 21st century can do, right? We can be out doing the science. That's always the basis of what the Wildlife Conservation Society does. So we're out monitoring whale movements through the New York Bight, that stretch of the coastline from Cape May, New Jersey, all the way up to Montauk, Long Island. But we're monitoring that right into New York Harbor because what we've discovered as we're monitoring whale movements through those waters in an effort to reduce ship strike, which is a huge mortality issue for these great whales, we've discovered that these whales, including the rarest of these whales, the northern right whale, move into the New York Harbor on a regular basis, which is utterly amazing. And a fact that without our science, I don't think people would have confidence that that was actually a typical movement as opposed to a one-off of an animal in distress. So we've partnered with people like Woods Hole to do that monitoring. But we've also been working on animals that are present in our collection, and there's a nice connection there. So sand tigers are a very charismatic part of our collection at the aquarium. We use them as a terrific ambassador to tell the story of this wildlife around New York and to open up New Yorkers' eyes to the idea that we are surrounded by wildlife. But one of the stories we can tell about those animals in our collection as ambassadors is the wild populations around us, because we've been tagging those animals now for about a decade. And the information that we're gathering from that tells us that, in fact, the Great South Bay and Long Island, and probably other areas that we haven't yet discovered, are nurseries for sand tigers during a really critical part of their life cycle. From birth to juvenile status, they're showing site specificity and returning to the Great South Bay as they move up and down the coast and spending an entire season there in a protected environment before moving out in adult size into the open waters. So if we can understand that, if we can tell that story, if we can get public support, then we can make a move to protect a very targeted area as opposed to trying to take it with a broad brush. And those are the kinds of stories we can tell. We can tell stories about marine mammals like harbor seals that are increasing in New York waters because of the success of the environmental actions we've taken from the Clean Water Protection Act on. We can talk about the urban waters and bringing them back with the Bronx River and the Westchester Rivers. And what else, of course, can we do? If this slide goes forward, I will tell you. We can invest in, continue to do what we do so well and have always done well, right? Which is tell those stories through our exhibitry, tell those stories to the people that come through our gates. But it becomes a virtuous circle, and that's the great part of the aquarium of the 21st century. We have a saying, my CFO and I have a saying, no margin, no mission. right? Which means if we're not actually pulling our weight, we're not bringing in money to perform conservation. So to the extent that the aquarium and its work and its storytelling and its mission and its broader engagement with New York succeeds, it succeeds also in driving attendance. It succeeds also in driving revenue. It succeeds also in creating an event business. I always say, I don't care why people come through my door, because once they come through my door, they're mine, and I can tell them the story and they're going to walk away changed. So as we continue to grow our base through our credibility, through our voice, through our innovation, we're actually improving our ability to deliver then again on that conservation through funding. What we can also do, of course, is use those animals, use those ambassadors, tell that story, and get people turned on to something that's really amazing and that the aquarium increasingly focuses on. We do have global habitats. We do talk about our field work around the world in many of our exhibits. But our core more and more, and our $158 million investment in Ocean Wonders, is to tell the story not just of sharks, but as sharks in New York as a way of talking about this marvel of wildlife that exists around us. But if we're just getting people excited and we're not doing anything more than that, and if we're only using science, and this I think is an important part of what it means to do urban marine conservation, we need to broaden that funnel. If we're only speaking to the choir and we're only speaking to those people who are already science literate or already science interested, then we're not forming a deep cultural connection and a deep ocean ethic about what it means to live in a city of islands in the archipelago of New York. So we have gone out and really tried to think through other cultural engagements beyond telling our animal ambassador stories. So whether it's using algae as art, whether it is marching year in and year out in the mermaid parade while everybody else is talking about mermaids, we're talking about bycatch, we're talking about plastics, we're talking about whatever it is, whether we are actually getting outside of the aquarium's perimeter and engaging in art installations for people to engage with while we're telling stories of the Hudson Canyon offshore, or we're using our digital channels of Blue York to tell those stories, we're getting outside the aquarium's footprint and we're getting outside of only talking through the science lens to get people a sense of connection, a sense of engagement, and a sense of value. Because no matter how great our policies, they will only reflect what we value. So we need to speak to that value of being surrounded by wildlife, of having an environment that undergirds our economic success and our recreational, cultural, and even spiritual needs to feel connected to nature in an increasingly urban world. One of the other things we can do, though, is go and ask for action, and we can engage everybody that comes through our doors. Every school child that comes into the New York Aquarium gets a letter form to fill out for an advocacy action. And that changes depending on what campaign we're in at any given time. But you can see right now, "Dear Krill, I love you." How many times have you received that letter? Getting kids to speak up for forage fish, getting kids to speak up for deep sea coral protection is not only a way of engaging their intrinsic curiosity and need to be involved, but it also has great impact. I can tell you right now that the deep sea coral regulations that were enacted with 15,000 of these pictures and letters surrounding an otherwise pretty anonymous regional fisheries council was truly amazing. And then the other thing that we can do with that aspect is to take our own message of take some action, reduce single-use plastic in your own life, think about your shopping choices, try shopping only for sustainable seafood, download the Monterey Bay Aquarium app. We can springboard that into a really robust campaign on something that sounds pretty simple, it is pretty simple, sounds like a pretty small starting point, and it is a small starting point, but it involves change, and that is banning the use of single-use plastic straws in New York restaurants and other venues, right? So our Give a Sip campaign, which was an outgrowth and integrated with the broader Aquarium Conservation Partnership campaign around plastics, has really been a great way to have political impact in the city of New York, and we're blowing that up to the state level. Because of the success of this campaign. Give a sip. And that is that.
Thank you,
Oh, there it
John.
is. I just wanted to say, so I'm sorry, I forgot I had one more slide because I haven't looked at this deck. I think the bigger question is, how do we not only preserve wildlife around the world, how do we start at home? How do we take a school kid who lives in New York and say, if you care about wildlife, that's a fantastic thing. But you don't have to only imagine that you can do that if you go to Belize or you go to Madagascar. You can do that right here in, again, one of the most heavily urbanized areas in the world. And you can do that because we can rethink the values behind living in a city. We can rethink the idea that a city should be divorced from nature and rather be thinking about the idea that a city should be integrated with nature. And that is our great hope at the New York Aquarium. So don't applaud because you already did.
Thank you, John. Now traveling down the coast to Florida, Amber.
Hi, thank you for coming. So we are the Florida Aquarium, and we're in Tampa, Florida, is where we're located. And I'm going to tell probably a more micro story than you've heard to date. Let's hope these videos work. So this is coral spawning. About 4 years ago, we decided that we were going to start focusing on sexual reproduction of corals. In 2008, Florida, 9 different partners, they got a grant from ARA to start doing coral nurseries, and most of the corals that go out are asexually reproduced. So they snap off a piece and then grow bigger and bigger pieces. But to preserve genetic diversity and the chance at adaptation for what's ever coming, we really need sexually reproduced corals. And that's something where Aquaria can really help, because I think it's underestimated how much expertise it takes to keep a coral alive in human care. So this is our Center for Conservation. It's about 20 miles south of our aquarium, and we have 2 coral greenhouses. These are the rescue corals, which I will talk about later. But we're using these 2 coral greenhouses to take those sexually reproduced spawn and then turn them into larvae, which is what you saw with the pipette, and then we grow them out to this size. We're testing which sizes, what's the youngest pretty much we can get them out so that we can keep producing more and more and more. And I have an overview of our Center for Conservation. We've had this about 5 years. You can see the 2 coral greenhouses in the foreground, and then we have our turtle hospital right behind that. But this is a partnership with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They've got their youth center over there in the back left. Maybe it's not your left. And then they're building their fish hatchery back there also. And we have room to build more greenhouses. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have another 5 greenhouses. We also have induced spawning chambers. So the first video you saw was taken in the field, which if anyone's done spawning, it's really amazing, but it also is very unpredictable in terms of timing, in terms of weather. You have to be out there at night. There's jellyfish invasions. It's very unpredictable. So we've brought it into the lab, and we've started to spawn species in the lab so we can adjust when they go, so we can do it in the middle of the day so our people aren't working 14-hour days, and then we can grow them up in the greenhouses. And so we're trying to upscale that as we speak. So this is a classic photo mosaic that Florida shows. It shows Carey's Fort Reef, which is an iconic reef, and what has happened over the last 30, 40 years. In the 70s, there were about 60 to 70% coral cover in the Keys. In the early 90s, we're showing it again, there we go. In the early 90s, it became about 15%. We've been holding steady at about 6%, but now we're down to about 5%, and I'll tell you why in a second. So the reefs were already hit with many, many, many disasters: hurricanes, climate change, land-based sources of pollution. But what's happening now is something that's actually catastrophic. It's the stony coral tissue loss disease. In 2014, it started around the port of Miami, and it has traveled over the last 5 years north all the way through our northern reef track, and then south. Now it's west of Key West. So pretty much the only thing that's left is the dry tortugas. So the state as a lead, along with NOAA and with universities and NGOs, they've decided to take out corals. So this has never been done before. It's completely against policy to take live, healthy corals out of the reef, but about half the corals are affected by this stony coral tissue loss disease, and it has about a 50 to 90% mortality. So we're seeing some species in the beginning, like up in Broward County in the northern part, that species has been completely wiped out of that area. So they're taking out about 4,500 species. So they're taking out about 200 individuals, hoping to get 50 genets, and that will be enough genetic diversity to be able to restore the reef once the disease has passed through. And even in the northern bounds, the disease is still ongoing. So we're taking out these 4,500 corals. Where are they gonna go? So they came and asked the AZA, the aquariums, if they could house them. So right now we have corals at about 19 different aquaria across the US, including New Jersey, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. And there are 4 aquariums in Florida, so Disney, SeaWorld, Monterey, and then us, who are holding corals. And we have the largest number of corals, and we were the first ones to take them. And we have now had 2 successful spawning events with 2 species that have never spawned or even been held in human care before. So that's really exciting. We're growing them up, and then when we get the okay, when all the scientists decide that we can finally put them back, we will start putting them back. And it's a huge collaborative effort amongst the whole coral community. It's truly a functional partnership. So these are our 65 AZA members from 21 states in Canada, and we so far have 19 organizations that have said that they will accept corals. So this is this is our latest spawning trip. So we outplanted 3,000 sexually reproduced corals, which is the largest outplant of sexually reproduced corals ever. And we put some directly on the reef, and we gave some to nurseries so that they could grow them out and asexually reproduce them so that there would be greater genetic diversity through what they're doing and through what we're doing. So you can see us going in and applying them is, once you get in there, you're really just using epoxy and putting them down. And then we go back and monitor them along the transect tapes to see how they're doing. And again, we're looking at what's the youngest age we can put them out and that they can survive. So this is actually the acroporids, and they are not affected by the disease. And so this is our aquarium to finish off our aquarium pictures. And these are what the nurseries use for their aquarium trees. And so that's what it looks like. They take care of those, they scrub them with toothbrushes about once a month, and then when they're big enough, then they outplant them all. So I think that was my last slide to tell you that story.
Excellent, what an extraordinary story. Thank you so much. So as I wait to receive some questions from the audience and actually ask one from my own, I just jotted down kind of some sentiments that I picked up from each of the presentations so far, and how our aquariums, what types of conservation action our aquariums are taking. I'm thinking that in Baltimore Harbor, the goal is to turn the benches around. I thought that was just such an extraordinary example of exactly what we're trying to do, especially in these urban areas. I think having the Capitol building in Illinois be a beacon of aquatic conservation was also a really striking image, so that was extraordinary. Having New Yorkers identify as being natives of an archipelago, I think, is also just an extraordinary vision. And then, of course, enhancing the sex lives of coral as a key ocean conservation strategy is also really compelling. So I'll ask a quick question as I look through yours to each of the panelists. I think you've already done a good job at this, but if you could describe what in particular you think aquariums bring to the conservation tables. What are you maybe able to accomplish that others, even in the conservation community, can't? And if you have a specific example, that would be great.
Can I start?
Sure, Charmaine.
The first example that comes to my mind, in Baltimore City, we definitely have a marine debris problem. And our last legislative session, there was a bill proposed to eliminate and ban beverage straws. That was it's something so simple, just a beverage straw that you receive at a restaurant when you sit down. But there were people against it, and I didn't know why, but they don't do what I do. And the aquarium supports these efforts, obviously. So before, we were gonna go down and testify in support of this straw ban. And just recently before that, we had a debris cleanup where we invited people out in the field. And we had asked people, we had about 150, and we're at the Fort McHenry National Monument. So this is like the only green space in Baltimore City. And we said, while you're picking up trash, if you can separate your straws, because we want to see how many we collect. And we made it kind of this fun game where we were going to put them all together and people could guess how many we had and they would win a prize. So with 150 or so volunteers over the course of about an hour and 15 minutes, we collected 2,570. And even to us, that was like mind-blowing. When you put that many straws together, I mean, it was more than these 2 tables could handle. So naturally, we packed them all up and brought them to Annapolis and brought them down. And they were there for people to see, just one beverage straw. It's not just one. Like, these are ending in our waterways. So to see that immense pile of straws and say, this is why we need to change people's minds. And hopefully that had a big impact. Unfortunately, I wish I had a better ending. It did not pass, but it was the first time it was ever proposed, and usually it doesn't. But we were able to, the state of Maryland was able to pass the styrofoam ban, which we were incredibly excited about. So we're hoping that next year when it goes into effect that we see less styrofoam out in our waterways. And if not, we're going to collect all of it and bring it down.
I think that's a great example. So similar to the Clean Water Act, we had started last year working on endangered species. And in the state of Illinois, last session and this session, a bill was introduced that would have weakened our state's endangered species and actually removed some scientists from the board. And we utilized a very similar tactic as our colleagues did and collected signatures and informed our citizenry who are coming through our doors, who are using our social media. And we were able to go downstate to a very flat part of the country, minus a lot of lakes, and talk about why biodiversity matters, why the endangered species is important, and that citizens from across the state, from the western part to the southern tip to Chicago, cared about it. But it wasn't just Chicago. And it was really important for us to be able to illuminate for our colleagues in Springfield that it's citizens across the state that care and want to defend our biodiversity. One of the work that we're doing on our rivers, similar to my colleagues here, has illuminated what happens when you do restoration work. Our river is in a post-industrial space, and we were reducing our biodiversity to almost less than a dozen species. We now have come up to double digits in terms of numbers of species. Well, our hope is by continuing to invest in that work, we can continue to grow that biodiversity. But we also, by using things like the Clean Water Act work that we were doing, we were lucky enough to get 1,200 so far. And it's been a great educational opportunity for us. We're using that not only to talk about the act itself, but to talk about clean water in the Great Lakes. So one of the things we're going to be doing this summer, when I leave here today, I'm going to Sheboygan tomorrow, Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And I'm going to meet with my colleagues in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Mayor's group, and we're going to talk about climate and climate impacts, but we're also going to talk about how we can do small acts and have a big impact. And one of those is me asking them, all of the mayors, some from Quebec, some from Minnesota, some from the Chicagoland area, from Chicago, to put in more water filling stations. Super small thing, just water filling stations at your parks, at your senior homes, at your kids' parks, right? Making sure there are places where we can use glass or reusable bottles to refill your water. It's one way towards reducing plastic pollution. It's not a big effort, but it's one that all of us can take an action on. And we're hoping that this year we can get a commitment by the majority of the mayors, and hopefully we can continue to do that sort of work. And I think that's a unique role we have as aquariums. We can bring our citizenry in a different way to bear, also by educating them through the work of our amazing scientists.
So I think one of the things that's really interesting is the aquarium is trying to affect cultural change for conservation outcome. Is the idea of sort of relinquishing the top-down model that we're all so comfortable with in so many ways. And it presents a really great challenge. And I think it presents a really great opportunity as we broaden this. But just as an example of that, we have a program called Wildlife Conservation Corps, which is basically a group of teens who come in and develop peer-driven conservation programs and help us develop our various advocacy campaigns and the way that we'll roll those out. And you saw one of those letters that I had up on the screen was, it was the I Love You Krill letter, but that was based around a forage fish campaign, protection for forage fish campaigns that we were trying to do. And if you notice, on both of the letter campaigns that we had, it's not just a signature. We're actually sort of leaving it blank and allowing kids or whoever fills it out to fill in their own content. And that's a little bit right there of a sort of step back and say, you tell us how this is important to you. You tell us what's important to you. But the forage fish was a very interesting one because our Wildlife Conservation Corps came up with this idea of let's do small poems for small fish, right? Forage fish are little. So let's do haiku. We'll ask the kids to write haiku poems in support of fish. What a clever idea. The problem is, of course, in 3-minute interaction with a 5-year-old kid, you not only have to teach them the science of the whole food chain, right, and how forage fish, but you also have to teach them what a haiku poem is and how that works. So it got a little tricky, as you might imagine. And I think I Love You Krill, it probably doesn't match up with haiku's strict construction. But it's just it's a really small way, and I think it's an interesting way. And for us internally, it was an eye-opening way to think about, like, oh, there's going to be challenges and there's going to be opportunity as we go through these attempts to broaden that funnel and bring more people in and think more broadly about conservation and outcomes. But it's also going to be an opportunity for growth internally for us as we think about how we're going to do that. So I think that's a really great future that's in front of us as we continue to rethink how to be the most effective conservation organizations we can be.
Excellent. And Amber, I just want to let the audience know that you are relatively new to the Florida Aquarium. How many months?
2 months.
2 months, okay. Yes. So I think you bring a really unique perspective in terms of being not working for an aquarium and now working for an aquarium. And we had dinner the other evening, and I appreciated, I think, what you said about how you like being in a place that is actually implementing this strategy that I know you have played a large role in developing over time. This conservation strategy just didn't happen overnight, and so I thought that was interesting for me to hear. So.
Yes. It's true. I came from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, so we were the ones taking the corals out of the water. And when I switched jobs, I've just been so excited to actually see the babies and be able to put them back, and something very hands-on that we are doing. I think I really answered the question already when coming from where I came from. I, of course, didn't necessarily realize how intricate and tough and how on it you have to be to keep especially corals alive. And so that's where husbandry and the infrastructure that comes with aquaria really, really help. And then for our turtle hospital, you know, we have vets on staff. They take care of all of our animals, but they're also there for that piece to come take care of the turtles that we bring in. And then recently we had our conservation committee of our board get together for the Florida Aquarium. And one of our very, very active members, I was telling the story of the disease, and she didn't know about it, and she was really upset as to why we and everybody else weren't getting this message out. But it's been in hundreds of articles. It's in, you know, PBS is doing Corals in Crisis, and she just hadn't heard of it. So I think that as our education opportunities are there within the aquarium to really tell that story and all the stories of conservation, and that's probably the largest strength of the aquarium, is being able to bring that message to the public.
Excellent. So I'm going to read an inspiring comment and then maybe ask one slightly challenging question to the panel. So having spent time at SHED and working as an intern in the SHED Aquarium Animal Hospital, I just want to say thank you for all that you do. Aquariums, especially SHED in Baltimore, okay, are the reason why I chose this field, to conserve the amazing creatures that make the ocean their home and to protect the ocean ecosystems. So that's really encouraging for especially someone who works in an aquarium to hear. that we are actually succeeding on that front. But aquariums and any institution that keeps animals in captivity are not without some controversy and some mixed feelings by our audiences and potential audiences. And so maybe, John, since you're the most senior of us and have been in title, and have probably answered this question many times, how do you balance that perspective from audiences with actually being able to communicate what positive conservation impact that aquariums are making?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think that, first of all, I'm always surprised when I sit down and I talk to people who are opposed to having animals in captivity. I'm surprised at how much common ground we have around care, welfare concerns. And I guess I would challenge a lot of those groups to match our expertise and our science and our long husbandry work to do that, as opposed to these campaigns, which are often rooted in just sort of not merely emotional, but solely emotional arguments. So there's that, but I don't think that's going to sway anybody. The bigger issue, I think, is I think we have to be honest with ourselves and really look at our collections and say, are there animals that should not be in our care? And I think this is an ongoing conversation that we have within the profession. I think it's an ongoing conversation, obviously, that we're having with the public. And just as a small example, as I take people through Ocean Wonders, which we have a very large exhibit that is about our advocacy for and our storytelling about the Hudson Canyon, which is the largest submarine canyon on the entire Atlantic coast, and it's right offshore, carved by the Hudson River in the last ice age through the continental shelf. It's a magnificent place, and it's beautiful, and people walk into that exhibit, and you can hear the inhale of breath, because it's absolutely inspirational and amazing. And people will inevitably tell me, because people are always talking about sharks purely in terms of white sharks, right, great white sharks, do you have a great white shark in this exhibit? It's a very, very common question. And my answer is always no, because, you know, especially here at the aquarium with the size of the exhibits we have, that would be absolutely inexcusable for us to do that. These are long pelagic swimmers. These are big animals. These are animals that hunt to live, and they're just not suitable for any sort of display in our aquarium. And it sort of opens people's eyes, because they then ask, well, why do you have the animals that you do? And because these are coastal sharks that are used to coming into small areas and swimming in small spaces, and they're very comfortable. In fact, they would be uncomfortable in big, open, unencumbered tanks. So you can start to turn that conversation around to the idea that there are animals that are appropriate. There are animals that we're very thoughtful about, that all animals in our care are receiving the highest level of attention and welfare, attention to their welfare. And then lastly, I think we can say, listen, these animals speak for something much greater than themselves. They speak for their wild populations that are offshore. And while we can have conversations about individual animals, and we can have conversations about where we differ around that, what we should really be focusing on, from our perspective, is how these animals can speak to and build a positive outcome for the wild populations that surround us. So when we talk about that, and when we focus on what the real mission is of the aquarium of the 21st century, I think we can always diffuse that, and we can find common ground.
Excellent, thank you. Well said. Any other comments from the panelists, or did John nail it?
I wouldn't mind adding to that.
Sure.
That is a question that we get to a lot, and I think it's a difficult question for people to ask, and it's one of my favorite questions to answer, because you should be asking that question. We should be held responsible. And I can't speak for all zoos and aquariums, but the National Aquarium is AZA accredited, so we are held to the highest standard of husbandry. And I know when I was growing up, zoos and aquariums had a completely different role. And when I talk to young individuals these days, I always mention to them, you know, I'm not going to say how many years ago, but when I went to the zoo and aquarium, you saw the animals because you wanted to see them and you didn't have an opportunity anywhere else. But now we take on this role of preserving these animals, these phrases of extinct in the wild, and the only place you can see them is in a zoo and aquarium. So that plays a really important role. So when people look at our, say, our amphibians or poison dart frogs that we have, the collection where we breed them, and they ask us if we're going to release them back into the wild, our answer is no, because we can't, because their habitat is so diminished. So I think the role that the aquarium plays is an incredibly important one when it comes to preserving our animals when they're in a protected care.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a little bit of time left. I loved this question. It's a fun one. Teenagers often feel alienated from the conversation about our oceans because they are not young enough to be cute, but not old enough to be taken seriously. I'm not sure either of those are true, but how do you remedy this? Does anybody on the panel have experience working with teenagers?
Yeah, we definitely do. We have an internship program. We have a college internship program. We have a high school internship program. We have several high school students out at our greenhouses. If they want to commit to a longer period of time, it's something that takes a little bit of training. And then we also have summer camps, which I know is still on the young end, but ours, I think some of them go up to 15, and those always really fill up. So we do constantly have that conversation of how our target audience is a 4-year-old and how then the parents come back with their 4-year-olds, but what do you do to get the teenagers in there? So we've been trying to do more targeted programming, and the internship program works, I think, very well.
Like all of us, we all have programs that do this kind of work, and I'm thinking of 2 different type of activities that we engage with our teens. We have a teen lab, and so students can come right after high school and hang out in a lab that they are really the owners and managers of. I had the opportunity to host, and we had the opportunity to host our congressional representative, Mr. Quigley, and to talk about climate resiliency and the emerging issues, especially as the context of the Great Lakes. And I just heard that we were going to have it, was walking by the teen lab, poked my head in and said, would any of you like to help me think through questions to ask Mr. Quigley and the climate scientist? And they came up with, they were the first questions and the best questions, I honestly believe. And they were able to have long-standing conversations with the climate scientist as well as the representative after that meeting that I still hear back from the Hill staffers about how important that was and how much the representative thinks about it. Similarly, they go out in the field with us. When we're doing work, especially plastic pollution work or restoration work, they're the ones who actually can be the most impactful in terms of sharing the message. They can share it in a way that maybe this wonky soul in the black suit can't always do. But they can hit it in a way that is using it has a passion and a commitment and a peer-to-peer sort of engagement that I think is critical. And that's one thing. That's one of the reasons why I work in the aquarium. I know that we have the ability to touch people in a different way with different information that can make a big difference. And so I think I would encourage everyone to try to find ways to engage with youth. They make me happier and more excited at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to say, I think the way for teenagers to feel like they're taken seriously is to understand that they are taken seriously. And I mean, I know that I'm speaking for everybody on this. It's like, I can tell you right now, if I'm designing a conservation program to reach teens, it's a bad idea to have me design it. I'm just, but so I need to take seriously teens. I need to understand how to reach their peers, and they are the ones to do that. And so not only are they taken seriously, they actually lead that process in so many ways. And I think that echoes right on down the chain. They're also the ones that, to Amber's point, reach out and are docents that are connecting with younger visitors who are coming in and being a bridge between adults and those younger visitors in so many ways. So I understand that feeling. I think that feeling is inherent in being a teenager, that I'm not cute and I'm not taken seriously. But I will say that from a programmatic operational standpoint, that is just simply not the case, and we can't survive if we do that. We really need to have teenagers be, or that cohort, that age cohort, be core to how we deliver our mission and who we reach. it with.
If you don't mind, Aimee, I was honored to be one of many members of our new mayor, Mayor Lightfoot's environmental transition team. She required that each transition committee have youth on it. And she had a youth-led committee that had no adult leadership in it. And each time there was a presentation to her of the new mayor, of what the findings were from these groups. The youth were there, and they spoke clearly and articulately, and sometimes much more articulately than the other adults. And I think I just want to encourage everyone in the room, especially those of you who work for government that are here, to think about that. She took it extremely seriously, and I feel like the impact of the results of that are going to go a long, long way.
Absolutely. And if I can chime in on behalf of Monterey Bay Aquarium, and really all of the aquariums that are taking an increasing amount of civic and community action, I think that while we have been built well-deserved reputations in STEM and science leadership, I think that civic leadership, policy leadership is really the next frontier. Mm-hmm. And from my experience that is shared by many panelists, there is a hunger and a big appetite for teenagers, early 20, college age students to come to our institutions to get that knowledge and to be inspired. So that is an extraordinary part, again, of what I hope all of the panelists here have shared with you all and demonstrated, that we are taking our roles as stewards as seriously as ever, and we are very interested in continue to work with you all to be the conservation leaders of the future. So with that, I'd like to thank our extraordinary panelists for our session today.